Well, this should be an interesting live because we're going to tackle, do narcissists change for love? I know that is a question that every person who's been in a narcissistically abusive relationship has asked. I certainly asked it multiple times. I know that I have worked I when I was in that relationship, I had never worked harder to get somebody's attention, admiration. I wanted them to choose me. And I worked just I probably worked some of the hardest in my life to save that toxic relationship. So today, let's talk about, do narcissists change for love? And if they don't, why don't they? Let's kind of dig into this. And how do you know if maybe you're the unicorn, if your relationship is one of the extreme rare ones that possibly has some hope? Let's dive into that as well. Someone just told me to please check my mailbox. You think I'm a winner? Do you think I'm suddenly a big I've won a massive like one of those giveaways that I don't believe actually exists? Maybe this does feel like one of those unicorn situations, like nearly an impossibility. I'm Dr. Kerry Kerr McAvoy. I'm a licensed psychologist with 20 years of counseling experience. And I am so excited to be hanging out with you today, talking about this timely but painful topic of, do narcissists ever change for love? And so already many of you are like knowing the answer is no, but let's talk about why not, and maybe whether or not maybe you might be the lucky one, the rare one. I mean, I know that there's a few big content creators who partners are still with them, that their marriage seems to be at the moment working. Let's talk about what's happening there that makes that situation different than the typical situation. Because unfortunately, 99.9% of us will be in the situation where we have a partner who does not change significantly enough for us to remain in the relationship. And I'm so thrilled that you're here. I see my friends Mariel, there's Kate that's here. I'm so glad you guys are on. I appreciate you very, very much. Oh, Michelle, thank you so much for buying a badge. I deeply appreciate that. So I'm super excited, and I also want to know your questions around this topic. Maybe you have wondered about why. How do you know if a narcissist really is changing? Is there a test or an exercise that you could give this individual? How do you know maybe that you're not the narcissist, or maybe you've been in a relationship that you work super hard at, and you're wondering, is this the point to pull the trigger and to get out? So I'd love to be able to talk about these issues. Be sure to put your thumbs up, a thumb up emoji before your question or comment, so that I know that you're speaking to me and not to somebody else, because these lives get lively, and we get to talking to each other as much as you're talking to me, which is one of the things I love about this, is that it's such an interactive experience. So thank you so much for being here. And if I miss your comment or question, please realize I'm watching 3 different platforms, and I'm trying to respond to questions across all of them. So it can get a little hairy for me at times, a little hairy. Again, for those of you who are joining me, I'm Dr. Kerry Kerr McAvoy, and today we're going to be talking about, do narcissists change for love? You know, it's interesting. I think a lot about this topic, and I think a lot about my history. And for those of you who don't know, I'm a psychologist. I got my degree in the early 1990s. Narcissism popped up on the radar just shortly after I started graduate school. It made the DSM-3. That's the first time it was a diagnostic category. It is considered a personality disorder, which is different than a mental condition. We can talk about that too. What's the difference between mental disorders and mental conditions? They're not the same, actually. Autism, Alzheimer's, um, ADHD, those are things that are disorders. Personality disorder is a disorder. That's not the same thing as major depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, things like that. Those are considered mental conditions. They're mental conditions. So that puts it in a whole different category. It's not in the same category as a depression. In other words, it doesn't come and go. You can't take a medication for it and fix it, for example. That's one of the big differences. It's a permanent part of your personality, permanent part of your hardwiring. So that means that we're dealing with a very different kind of situation than, so when we're dealing with somebody who's struggling with bipolar disorder, even though some of those conditions, bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, for example, are lifelong conditions. There's something that somebody will struggle with. Sorry about that. Struggle with off and on. I'm suddenly wishing I had lipstick on. It's really bugging me. So I'm going to take a moment and do this. Like, well, I do this in a live, right? Isn't that weird? Sorry about that. But it's just really bugging me. But yeah, so personality disorders is not the same as a condition. And that's our first tip off that this situation is going to respond to very differently to relationships. It's not a matter that we can simply cure somebody by taking a medication or cure somebody with a simple treatment. This is something that's going to be a ongoing battle for this person. And I really love Dr. Ramani's, she has this analogy she uses. She talks about narcissism and all personality disorders as like a rubber band. So you can have a rubber band and you can stretch it into different shapes. It can have some flexibility and do that. But the problem is whenever there is stress, the rubber band is going to revert back to its original shape. So the minute there's something comes up that for the narcissistic person or other personality disorders pops up that is disrupting or distressing, they're going to revert back to their original way of handling life, relationships, and situations. So yeah, this is a really great question. Thank you, Sarah T. She wants to know, can you actually alleviate the symptoms of personality disorders? You can, with some of them, with a lot of hard work and a lot of appropriate kind of therapy. It takes a specific type of therapy that's confrontive. It's not so much insight oriented or ones that appeal to feelings, but more is helps them to understand the way in which they're showing up in the world, looks at their underlying motives, kind of challenges them on how to behave in a better, different way. So it is very difficult. And it's something, think about this. If you are a person, because here's the problem with narcissism and a lot of personality disorders, is if you're a person who is convinced that you are good the way that you are. I mean, all of us, don't you feel like who you are is decent? You like who you are? I mean, you've been living with yourself for forever. You know yourself, right? Can you imagine somebody coming along and telling you that you have a problem for the way that you show up in the world, how you relate to people, and how even you approach your job? That the way that in which you defend yourself or justify yourself, the way that you conduct yourself in relationships is problematic. That's what happens to narcissists. That's what they hear. They in themselves, if they were going through life, tooling through life on down the path of life, they don't see themselves as problematic. They then, but however, despite that, the way in which they see the world, the perspective that they have, and this is the other really hard thing for those of us who are not narcissistic, as well as those who are narcissistic. Each of us comes into the world with a particular perception. Let's step back in time and pretend for a moment that we all think that the world is flat. So we would then, based upon that assumption, conduct our life in a certain way. I certainly wouldn't get in a plane and fly because I wouldn't want to fly off the end of the earth. I certainly wouldn't get into a ship because I didn't want to go over the edge. I mean, so if you have that perspective, it's going to affect the decisions that you make. Maybe a flat earth is not particularly huge day in and day out, but it would shape some of your decisions. Now imagine your perception of the world is that it's at war, that everybody is out for themselves and that you can't trust anybody. Even the people that you have known the closest to you, you have seen, experienced, or found out that they're very protective. They're very defensive, that they are always watching out their best interest and not your best interest. So you've learned either by nature or nurture that you can't trust other people. So you go into these relationships expecting everyone is looking out for themselves and expecting that everybody is doing whatever strategies they can in order to get somebody else to do something. Because again, if you're living in a world that's at war, if every single person that you encounter you think is watching out for themselves, then they're not going to lend you help. They're not going to give you tools. Anything that they do for you, they would do it because it benefits them. They would see everything as possibly exploitive. So they would view what you do suspiciously. Like, why are you doing this? And what gains might you get by doing this? Because that's the way that they approach the world. So they anticipate you're approaching the world from the same way. So as a result of that, then nobody, thank you so much for that gift, you guys. Then nobody really trusts each other. You certainly wouldn't, I wouldn't trust you. I would think, oh, so and so is crying and asking for this. I wonder what they really want out of this. Or if somebody else did me a favor, I'd think, I wonder what favor I'm going to be asked to do for them. Or if I upset somebody, I would say, I bet you this person's going to get me back. There's going to be a grudge held against me and there's going to be revenge. I would interpret everything from a very, very cautious, paranoid, suspicious perspective. That's narcissism in a nutshell. They're approaching everything from a cautious, suspicious perspective. So anything you do, that's why your crying is meant with like, oh, there you go again. You turned on the taps. Everything that you do is you're seeing yourself reflected back. Exactly, Mariel. They're projecting. They see you from their grid, and their world grid is one of danger. And so as a result, they don't really let you in. They certainly don't trust you. They don't believe that you have their back. And they even think that I don't even think that they actually know what love is. I struggle to think that love is a concept that makes a lot of sense to them. I think that they view it more out of a kind of like, oh, this is a great feeling, from kind of an infatuation. Like, I really like the way I feel with this person when in the new part of the relationship. But then when it starts to get like ordinary, moves into the day to day stuff, then that part that doesn't go so well, because now you're asking them to be a team member. And you can't be a part of a team that you don't trust. Can you imagine what that would look like at work if you put together a group of people? Imagine you played Survivor at work and you believed that only the last man standing was actually going to get paid. How would you ever create teams? And that's one of the things that's kind of fun about watching reality shows, is we watch people who are actually competing against each other, then try to also do cooperative strategies, because they're doing both. They're trying to compete against each other while they try to do something cooperative, and it ends up being really, really tricky because it's hard to do both at the same time. So if you have that perspective, it makes you extremely hesitant to be vulnerable, very unlikely to be intimate, struggle to know how to really show up yourself to other people because you're anticipating getting backstabbed. I can't imagine living life like that. And right now we have somebody who's maybe is narcissistic, who's saying she really resents being called a demon. I don't know if it's a he or she. Sorry if I'm misgendering you. I can't tell by your name, but I can't imagine living from the perspective of every interaction potentially being dangerous, being very loaded. That would be really, really challenging. But what's so hard for the victims is that we don't see the world that way, and we make the opposite error. We make the error that everybody is accommodating, cooperative, that we, oh, thank you so much that you're saying female, bipolar, and have BBT, BBD. Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that. Appreciate the trust. It's really tough when you're coming from the other angle, because your perspective is that everything's cooperative, that people are there to show up and feel vulnerable, that there's safety here. And when you meet somebody who's love bomb you, you get that message. The message you get during that initial meeting is that this is an amazing person who's on the same page with you. Now, we now know, those of us who've gone through this, that love bombing is actually mirroring you, but you didn't know that you were mirrored. You didn't know that you essentially met yourself. And so as a result, you think that this person is exactly who you met, and that this person is going to be the most amazing team member you've ever met in your life. I remember I had like a mental checklist. Actually, after I was widowed, I devised this list of what I really wanted to find in a partner. And it was like a checklist, and there was a few things that I did not have in my long-term marriage with my late husband. He and I weren't very good at conversations, at deep topics. And I really wanted someone that could show up and talk about a lot of different things with me. My late husband was really all about his work. So we talked, I learned a lot about construction. So you want to ask me about, 2x4s and things like that, I can certainly, I've held my own with him for years. I had to go out to job sites and look at concrete cast poured on site and all sorts of things. I learned a lot of new things that were fascinating about it. But we just didn't have a real rich kind of like psychological conversations. And me as a psychologist, I really wanted that. So when I met the narcissist, that's what it felt like I got. I felt like I met this amazing person who knew how to carry on incredible conversations with me, not realizing that I had met his potential for one, but I also had met a mirror of me, that he was presenting who I wanted to see. And I have a feeling that if I was to watch him today with his new relationship, which I have no idea what he's doing or where he's at or who he's with these days, I don't keep track of him. But I have a feeling if I could like peer in through the kitchen window and observe his conversation, I have a feeling it would be a completely different person, that I probably wouldn't recognize him, that there is a chameleon-like nature to this relationship. So that's the first problem, is that we come at these relationships from a completely different worldview. So that makes it super hard. I think the other big challenge is that narcissists are more about looking for stabilization. They really look for stability in their life than they're actually looking for vulnerability and intimacy in their life. So if you came at it from a perspective of you weren't good, let's take kids for a moment. Anybody who's ever played a game with a kid, you know that they're going to lean heavily into whatever skill sets are yours that are really good. So if you're playing a math-based game and they're not that great at math, they're going to make you do all the math, right? Or maybe they're playing a game that takes them a lot of imagination and they know that you're way better at imagining, that's not a word. They know you're way better at imagining things than they are. They're going to ask you to create the story. So they're going to lean into you wherever they perceive their weakness. They're going to lean into you and ask you to do the job of that. The problem is when it's an adult doing that. So narcissists are not good at planning. They're not very good at delaying impulses. They struggle with self-reflection. They're way over ambitious. They tend to be kind of restless and bored and move from activity to activity. They tend to not stick with things long enough to really get good traction. Now, that's not true across the board. Some do, some don't. I mean, we can see people who have done very well in the entertainment or politics who seem to stick with stuff. So it's not a true across the board, but you do see where they struggle. They lack a good band of morality, which gets them into trouble, possibly legally. So you see all these kind of deficits. Well, when they get in these relationships, they're really looking for you to strengthen them through these deficits, to take the spots that you're better at and then strengthen them so that they have more going for them. That's the primary reason we're in a relationship. In other words, you do complete them. You do, but they won't complete you and don't want to or plan to complete you. So it's a very lopsided relationship. So you come in with your needs, hoping they'll meet some of your insecurities, and they don't show up. I mean, one of mine was I'm insecure about my physicality. I have been most of my life for lots of complicated reasons. And my ex made sure to tear me down at any good moment that he had a chance. He'd let me know that I was not all that. So that was, certainly harmful. But they have this radar to know where you're insecure. Maybe it's not about your physicality. Maybe it's about how organized you are, or maybe it's about whether or not you're really good at planning something, or maybe it's something else. They'll find maybe it's about your child rearing practices. You're not for sure what kind of parent you are. They'll find your vulnerability and then they'll end up leaning on it, because once they get you into a relationship, as much as they see you as somebody who's going to stabilize them, the relationship then triggers their competitive nature, and they begin competing with you. So the only way to get rid of a competitor is you outdo them. And that's what they do. They do that over and over. They constantly are outdoing you. They make sure that whatever you feel a little shaky, and maybe you're actually doing great on that area, they make sure to let you know that you're not quite all that. Even though you think, hey, it's kind of like embarrassing or, sort of silly because you may be an expert at something and they may not. For example, I have a Ph.D. in psychology, and mine would still try to give me psychological advice and help. And he didn't have a bachelor's in he didn't even have a bachelor's in psychology, and yet somehow he figured he knew more about human nature than I did, despite the fact that I'd come into the relationship for 20 years of counseling. So hours and hours and hours, plus to get a PhD was 5 years, 4,000 hours of supervision of counseling, and then 20 years of counseling on top, and he still felt he knew better than me. So, I mean, it's laughable. Well, here's another silly example. I'd raised three sons, took care of the entire family. I was a traditional wife. In addition to having a part-time counseling practice, I took care of the home front completely, the home front at all aspects. My late husband really expected that. He worked really hard. I felt like it was kind of fair exchange, so I stepped in and did that. So, how many years of laundry do you think I've had under my belt taking care of a family of five? A lot. And in fact, I'm a master at stains. I really know how to get at grease stains. One of the things I've learned. My ex had the audacity to tell me not only how to wash laundry, but how to hang it, as if I needed lessons on that. After raising kids and having a family for 20 plus 30 years, he still felt like he knew better than I. And mind you, this is a guy who basically handed off child rearing to his one long-term relationship to that wife. He didn't really wasn't involved. He was gone most of the time. And that was from his report, not hers. He told me he was gone most of the time. So if he says that, he really wasn't there, because take that and times it by many, many times. So yeah, thank you so much. Somebody just said they had read my book, Love You More, which is if you want to know what actually happened inside that relationship, what it was like, how could a psychologist get into a toxic relationship after 20 years of counseling? Well, this tells you how and why. One of the things that I'm very vulnerable about this story, Love You More, I feel super, super vulnerable about it, is that I know I gave this guy so many chances. This is why this topic of does love change a narcissist's heart? I gave this guy so many chances. I really believed in the power of change. I mean, I'd spent my whole life trying to help people become different. I really believed in the power of therapy and counseling. And the entire time we were in that relationship, he was in counseling, or at least he said he was. Now, did he actually show up? I have no idea. I can't attest that he did. But whenever he said he was working hard, I believed it, despite all his actions not showing that he was. Now looking back, I'm realizing that he wasn't working. He was just giving lip service to that he probably, I know I'm convinced that he probably never loved me. Certainly not in the way that I interpret love, which I would define it as a commitment to another person, to their best interest. I really would believe that. So let me start to take some questions and to kind of talk about why love doesn't change narcissists, but we also can talk about how to know whether or not your narcissist is actually being sincere about trying to change, because I want to give you an exercise that you can do to really test this out for yourself. And then to talk about why we get deluded by thinking that somehow we're going to help this person overcome this great difficulty. But I really appreciate this question that Sarah asked is, can childhood trauma create a narcissist? It can, but it most likely doesn't. It's probably a combination of biosocial issues. So the latest thinking is that it's not just trauma, and it's not a bad parent-child attachment. It's not an overindulging parent. That it probably is a combination of genetics and environmental issues that create this problem. We're not exactly for sure why. And I have a feeling that once we get to know it better, that we're going to understand that there are a lot of mechanisms that cause narcissism. There's probably just not one type, that there's different types and different ways in which people can become narcissistic. Take depression, for example. You can become depressed because your life circumstances have turned for the worst. You can become depressed because of a biological chemical error. You can become depressed for a combination of reasons. I think that we're going to discover that narcissism is much the same. But the difference with depression and narcissism is depression is something that's treatable. It's a condition. There's medication for it. And unfortunately, with narcissism, that there's not a medication. It's part of the wiring of the person. It's the way that they're made up. They've actually done neuroimaging and found that narcissist brains actually functions differently, that there's parts that are more active than other parts are not active enough, and that this is causing some problems. Now, you can say, yeah, but brains are shaped by early childhood experiences. Yes, that's true, but I think that that's a combination of things. I have a feeling there's a vulnerability that then ends up also getting activated based upon an environmental situation. There was another really great question that came in on it. Um, Phoenix, I would love to, is it specific research? It's hard to find. The problem with there's the internet and then there's the research internet. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to get good access to the research aspect of the internet. But I know that they're actively looking at that. That's a big question that they're continuing to are very, very interested in. I'm trying to go back to, oh, Britt asks, how did I come up with the title Love You More on my book? Love You More is because you'll love this. He played a game with I love you. So he would not say, rarely would he say I love you first. Usually I would say it, I love you, and then he'd say love you more, and then I would like, at first it was cute. I thought, oh no, I love you more. I even bought a plaque for a house. I don't have it anymore. I got rid of it because it was very painful and it just upset me. It just reminded me of how things weren't what I thought they would be or what I hoped would be. But I could never, it would never end. He always had to have the last word. So if I said, love you more, he goes, no, I love you more. And it went on and it got just like exhausting. So finally I would stop, just frustrated, feeling shut down. And here, think about why we say, I love you to somebody. We're looking for an emotional experience. We're looking for someone to affirm our value to them, that they see us, that they appreciate us, that we feel safe with this person. We're looking for all that affirmation and connectedness. And what I would get was competitiveness. It was always a one-upmanship, and he would try to find a way to make sure that he would win. And at the end of it, I didn't feel loved. I felt missed. It was certainly a missed opportunity, emotional opportunity for me. I felt outdone, and I felt not seen. So I got tired of it. So I don't know if I really ever stopped saying that, but I just got really weary of the situation. Hey, Farmer Mary Beth, it's so good to see you. I see that you said Kerry. I don't know if I missed your earlier comments or not, or you're just trying to get my attention. You got my attention if you're trying to talk to me, but yeah. So if you're in a narcissistically abusive relationship, and thank you so much, you guys, for all the likes and the follows. I really, really appreciate that. Oh, I love that. Becky said, I would ask, do you love me? And he would say, uh-huh. Oh, yeah, I bet that really warmed your shackles there, didn't it, Becky? I bet that made you feel super seen and very, very supported. And thank you, Meryl. I was looking for the word. It was a bad way to respond to an emotional bid. Have you guys ever heard of what emotional bids are? You know what they are? That comes through Dr. John Gottman's work. And he said there's 3 ways. Bids are anytime that we're acting for an exchange. Like when you guys type a comment or a question, you're making an emotional bid of me. You're wanting me to see that comment and respond. And we do that all the time. We may tell a person a joke and we're looking for them to think it's funny, or at least respond and think it's not funny. When we start to read something, we expect the person we're reading it to is listening. If we call somebody, we're looking for them to hopefully answer. Or if we text, we're looking for them to text. We're looking for an interaction. Sometimes emotional bids can be nonverbal. It might be that we just make eye contact with that look like, I wonder what you think of this. And then the person who knows you would say, oh, they're wanting to know what I'm thinking and if I'm on the same page with them. So it doesn't have to necessarily be verbally, but it also can be physically. It could be you give someone a hug. You want them not just to drop arms and stand there stiff. You're looking for them to embrace you too. See, that's a part of an emotional bid. But John Gottman's research, which if you guys don't know anything about him, really check him out. It's fascinating. He's done years and years and years and years and years of marital research to the point that he's been able to predict with over 90% accuracy if a marriage or a relationship is going to make it, based upon just watching the couple have an argument. Isn't that amazing? So what he found is that we make these emotional bids, and there's 3 ways we can respond. We can either meet it, see it and respond. We can ignore it, or we can actually turn it down and reject it. So an example of ignoring it would be to say, hey, I'm telling you a joke and I start to tell you a joke and you act like you didn't hear it. That would be ignoring it. Or say that I start to say something and you turn around, you kind of walk out the room as if I wasn't talking. That would be another way of ignoring it. Rejection's easy. It's just an outright saying no, thank you. But what they found was couples who, they look at successful relationships that do well, respond positively to emotional bids 80% of the time or more. And they found that couples that ended up divorced responded to their affirmatively only 30% of the time. So yeah, it's a massive disparity. So when my ex was playing that love you more game, which wasn't a game to me, he was ignoring the request and in a way kind of turning it down. And if you stand back and you look at your relationships, ask yourself, how often does your partner show up? I remember that one of the things I used to do was, this was with my late husband, if we were going out to an event, like say we're going out for dinner, I would dress and come out and I'd kind of stand and pause in the center of the room for a second. And my late husband would say, "You look beautiful. I am so lucky," or something like that. I would do the same with my second husband, the narcissist, and his eyes would like rush over me as if I wasn't there, and he'd move on to the next thing. And I know he knew what I was looking for. That I was hoping for some affirmation. In fact, he would step out of the closet and I'd say, "Oh, you look great tonight." So I'd give it to him, but then I would never get it back. So if you stand back from your relationship, pay attention to how much and often they're responding to you. An unhealthy relationship will be too much of ignoring or outright rejection. And that's a tip that this person's not invested psychologically in you, in your heart, in your issues. So be very, very careful about that. So let's talk about how to test if a narcissist is actually changing. Okay, I'm going to give you an exercise. So if you're in a relationship right now, and if you wonder whether or not you should stay or not, and you're like about had it, and you're really like at the tipping edge, but your partner keeps promising they're working, I'm going to give you a tip on how to test it. Now, you have to promise me you're not going to share this with the narcissist. Please, please, please don't share this exercise with a narcissist. But here's the tip, okay? So for anybody who's trapped in the trauma bond, trapped with cognitive dissonance, can't make a decision of what's the right thing to do, this is the test. And yes, Joyce, I know they don't change, but not all of us are convinced that that's true. So I'm going to give you a test to help you know whether it's true, even though most of us who've been on the other side would say, "No, I know it's not true. I might have wished it was true, but I know it's not true." And they made a lot of promises, but they never kept the promises. Okay, so here's the exercise. I want you to think of 5 to 10 items that are measurable. That's got to be measurable. That's the tricky part. It has to be things that you can actually know are happening. So in other words, you can't say, "I just want them to be happier," or "I want them to make me happier." What's that? You ask yourself, how would you know if you're happier? Well, maybe it means you go out to dinner more often, or maybe it means you have conversations with each other. Maybe it means you're having more physical intimacy with each other. I don't know what it is, but ask yourself, whatever it is, make sure it's measurable. It has to be something you can observe and actually count, okay? Or here's another way to test it. If someone was watching you from outside the kitchen window and you told them this issue, they would say, "Yes, I can tell it's happening," or "No, I cannot." So if somebody from the outside can't determine if it's true, then that's not measurable. It needs to be measurable. But I want you to identify 5 to 10 measurable items you want different about the relationship. Maybe it is you want your partner to actually carry on a conversation with you back and forth. Maybe you'd like to see the number of fights drop. Maybe you'd like this person not to call you bad names. Maybe you'd like this person to initiate more often date night with you. But whatever it is, it needs to be measurable. Okay, you get the hang of it. 5 to 10 things. Now, I'm assuming you're in a state with this relationship where you two have been talking about it's not going well, and that you're not for sure if you're going to stay, or at least they know there's a lot of trouble, that there's been some conversation about trouble. And this person says, "No, I've never worked harder. I'm really working on it. Don't leave me. I'm invested. I'm here. We don't want to break up the family." Then this is what I want you to say to them. I want you to say, "I'm watching for the next 6 months, 5 to 10 different things about this relationship, but I'm going to tell you 3 of them. But I'm looking to see if all of these things improve, and that will show me that you're really working on this relationship." And you share 3 of them. Now, what 3 do you share? Well, I wouldn't share the most important one. That might be one I would hold back. But I would share something that's important, and certainly a couple other ones that are doable. But you only share 3, and you never get this part, never tell them the rest, ever, not ever. Because here's the problem. Think back to that love bombing. During that love bombing stage, they asked you a lot of questions about yourself. At least some of them did. I know mine did. I sent mine reams of letters about myself. I gave him the playbook to carry for sure. Well, they're and what did they do? Well, they met that playbook. They showed up exactly how we wanted them to. So if you tell them all 5 to 10 items that you want to see changed, they're going to change those things and not change one other thing. That'll be it. And so they'll exactly meet that bar and never exceed it. But if you say, here's 3 of them, but I'm never telling you the rest, then they don't know what the rest are. And this will do one of 2 things. You get some narcissists who are actually sincerely invested. For whatever reasons, they don't want to lose the relationship. And may get super serious about doing something about it. Now, again, I'm thinking 99.9% won't do this. But the majority will look at you and say, this is a setup. I don't like it, and I'm not participating. And then they're out. And now you know. It clarified the situation. Now you don't have to wonder, do they really mean they're working? They say they're working, but are they? I wish I had done that. This is what I wish I had done. Because I'll tell you, I sat there in limbo for over a year, wondering whether or not this person was really putting in the work of healing or not. And despite all the money that was going out to therapy, all of that, it was exhausting. And this way, it definitely would help make this simplify this. Yeah, exactly. Mine would ask me to plan date night, and I'm like, "Sir, I'm your wife." Yeah, I agree. They just offload all this work to everybody else. Could I have inadvertently created a narcissist? Michelle, are you talking about a child or are you talking about an adult? You can't create an adult. A narcissist doesn't become a narcissist as an adult. They already are one. Yeah. So if that's a question that you have and it's about somebody that's already grown up, then no, you didn't make this person the way that they are. They came in that way. Yeah, I mean, there's certain things that we can do that certainly can make things worse for sure. But no, you didn't make someone become narcissistic. Rocky says, I feel those self aware narcissists on YouTube are truly working on change through therapy, and they have to be on the lower end of the spectrum to be able to do that. I suspect that too, Rocky, that partly the people who are, hey, Samantha, so good to see you. Partly the people that we see who are successfully self aware narcissists, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of self aware narcissists who are not successful, but those who are successful at it or seemingly successful for the moment. And I think that's a reasonable way to put it. It's for a moment. That doesn't, remember, Dr. Ramani says they're like rubber band. They may be stretched out and be different in some ways, but you get into a certain kind of situation, they're going to snap back to the way that they usually respond. So I would want to see something over a very long, I'm talking years length of time and being able to sustain these changes. Yeah. No, Michelle, if you're talking about your husband who says that that you made him a narcissist, no, he's victim blaming. He's taking the victim role and blaming you. This is a convenient, but this is a very common strategy that narcissists love to do, is they love to say that you made them this way, that if you didn't bring these issues up, or if you didn't do whatever it was that you're doing, then there would be no issues and they wouldn't behave this way. I'm telling you, he's this way with everybody. He's not that way with you. He's that way with everybody. He's that way with the kids. He's that way at work. He's that way everywhere. And it is that he doesn't like to be challenged, and he doesn't like to lose control, and he doesn't like to have anybody think that somehow that they're doing better than him, because that makes him feel super insecure and shaky. Yeah. So try this exercise. If you're in this situation and you really wonder whether or not this person's really sincerely working on the relationship or not, try this exercise. Provide 10 examples of things to change or improve. Well, they have to know the inside of your relationship to know whether or not what things you'd want to be different. So I don't know what's going wrong inside your relationship. So I would have to know that. Oh, thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. So it might be like, what about the fights? What's happening with the arguments? How well are you be treated around? Is there name calling going on? Is this person actually stepping up and helping out in the house? Do you feel like you can trust them with things? Those are the things that I would be looking for. Why can't they help losing control of their temper? Well, actually, they can. We know they can because they don't lose it everywhere with everyone, right? So that to me shows they can manage it. It's just at certain places they feel like they don't have to manage it. And so they don't feel like they have to manage it with you. They feel that you deserve whatever they give you. So they can definitely, anybody who says they can't help themselves, that's just, I'm sorry, I'm going to swear, bullshit. I call bullshit on it. Because if you watch their behavior, they're picking and choosing where they do with what they do and with whom. It's entirely under their control. Thank you so much, Heather. It's so good to see you, by the way. Yeah, that's totally under their control. Or if they really were out of control, then anything that triggered them, they would be losing it everywhere. They would basically be out of control of their life, and their life would reflect that. They would be getting fired everywhere. They wouldn't have any relationships. They'd be blowing up the neighborhood. I mean, you'd see that problem everywhere. Yeah, Colette, thank you so much for the question. How do you heal from a narcissist? It is one slow process. It takes first getting out. It takes us realizing we didn't create this problem. We didn't make this person this way. This person has been giving us just the things that we need to hear in order to keep us on the hook and on the line. And that's what frustrates people about reading my book, Love You More, is they end up like, why did Kerry stay for so long? Why did she try chances after chance? I mean, I learned on my honeymoon night or honeymoon vacation, this guy had been cheating. I learned 2 months into the relationship that nothing he'd been doing was truthful, that about everything had been a lie. His working late at work, he wasn't working late at work. His work trips weren't work trips. I learned that the second month into the marriage on the last night of the honeymoon when somebody got a hold of me and told me they'd been dating for a while. So my whole world blew apart and I realized I didn't know anything about this guy, but I stayed for 2 more years. Why? Well, for lots of complicated reasons. And any of you who found yourself in this position know that they usually get us into a very complex situations. Like we are moving internationally. My house had been sold. My car has been sold. And I'm moving to a country that don't speak the language and he does. So how do I pull the plug on all of that? Do I go to the new country? I had just bought a business there. What do I do with that? I have to finish my visa there. Do I go and finish it? I mean, I was literally caught mid transition with this information. And I know I have talked to many of you to know that this same thing happens to you. Maybe you're expecting a baby. Maybe you just bought a house. Maybe you guys just moved across the country and sunk everything into the situation that you're in. And now you find yourself out this horrible thing. And you're like, oh my goodness, it's not simple to back out of this. It's not simple to back out. So it's extremely, I did go. I moved with him and got him into treatment. And I thought, because I didn't know about narcissistic abuse, I didn't know about sex addiction either, which is what he claimed he had, that I didn't know that these things were not treatable, that these were, pretty permanent conditions. I knew he was narcissistic. I never tried to diagnose him, but now if I look at a DSM-5, the criteria, like ding, 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 yes, he fits criteria. He said he was a narcissist. I mean, so he had diagnosed himself already and knew he was narcissistic. So, but I didn't know that it was narcissistic abuse. I didn't know anything about a trauma bond. I had never heard of a cognitive dissonance to know that I was about ready to step into the most confusing thing in my life, the inability to make a decision. And unfortunately, that's what most of you are in. If you're wondering if this narcissist can be saved by love, then you've been trapped in the cognitive dissonance. You're confused between what you think is real and what is actually true. That you've met both Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and you've been told that the Dr. Jekyll personality is the real person who just has been misunderstood and never given chances and never provided the right kind of support. And if you showed up and did all of that for this person, then they would finally change and they really would get help and then your life would be better. But you didn't know it was the Mr. Hyde personality that you met that was the true person. And if you'd met Mr. Hyde in the first place, you would never have gotten into the relationship with that person at all. Oh, thank you so much. I have never seen a more beautiful gift. Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. So that's the heartbreak about all of this is that so shocking, so horrific that we really take people at their word. We're quite vulnerable when we enter into a relationship. We assume good things. We assume this person's sincere about what they're presenting to us. unfortunately, they're not sincere. Unfortunately, they're not sincere at all, that we've actually met somebody who's very predatory. That's a word I like to use. This is a predatory relationship, very predatory. And the other thing, and I'm so glad there are men here, and I appreciate every one of you so much. Men are as frequently as narcissistically abused as women. We just don't provide a safe enough platforms, safe enough places for them. And I think it's heartbreaking that happens. And I'm thrilled you guys are following me because I deeply care about your recovery too. So somebody asked, how do we start the recovery process? Well, the first recovery thing that you can ever do is to wake up and realize that you've been sold a lie. Realize that you had been conned, or this was a scam, that you thought you met this wonderful person and that actually isn't true, that this person has been predatory about getting into the relationship with you, and that they have been looking for the assets, whether your good nature, your good name, maybe your stability, maybe your money, maybe your physical appearance, maybe the power that you have, the influence that you have, maybe even the access to certain communities that you have. They found something about you that gave them some kind of entree into a world that they have wanted to be in, felt it was unfair to be in, and that they knew that you had. And then once they got into it, then they were mad at you for having those things, and they begin to strip those things from you, making you more and more insecure, more of a shell of the person that you originally were when you met them. And that's so, so hard. So here's a fascinating question. Thank you. And I did too, Saren. I felt in love with this potential as well. Somebody said, so how do you know it's not bipolar versus narcissism? Well, you can be both bipolar and narcissistic at the same time. Please hear me on this. If you take away anything from today's live, hear me on this. This is a common error people make. People assume because you have one mental health condition that you can't have others. Oh, no, 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 no. You can have many of them all at the same time. You can be narcissistic, have anxiety, and be depressed all at the same time. And you could be schizophrenic too. Just because you have one mental health condition does not necessarily exclude or lock out the potential to have other complicating problems. You often do. You will often see, for example, narcissism and ADHD. They often kind of co-occur. Now, I am not saying ADHD people are narcissistic. I'm also not saying narcissistic people have ADHD. I'm saying these things sometimes happen to live in the same neighborhood and happen together. So you could have someone who's bipolar and narcissistic. So what would I think? How would I differentiate them if it was just one, but it could be two, both of them? Bipolar disorder would come and go, and it would respond to medication, and you would not see any of the narcissistic traits when they're on meds and under good care. That's what you wouldn't see that entitlement, that arrogance, the competitiveness, the jealousy. That would all go away once they're on medication. Now, are bipolar disorders ever competitive and jealous? No, that's usually not my experience. I mean, I've treated a lot of them in my life, and there was a common disorder that would come in for treatment. And usually they're amazing, wonderful people who just happen to have an unfortunate condition. So if you're seeing the arrogance and the competitiveness and the resentfulness and everything's unfair and this person thinks the rules don't apply to them, chances are this person may have bipolar disorder and be narcissistic at the same time. Having multiple mental health issues definitely makes it more difficult to treat, that's for sure. But many times you may have an addiction on top of that. This person may be misusing a substance. These things often happen at the same time. And I don't know how many times I have people say, well, they can't be narcissistic because they're depressed. No, they could be narcissistic and depressed. Or they can't be narcissists because they're anxious. Oh no, I know many narcissists who are anxious too. It doesn't just because one exists doesn't preclude the other one existing as well. Yeah. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I would suspect that your partner probably does have bipolar disorder if somebody diagnosed him with that, but he probably also has, or she has, narcissistic traits as well. Yeah. This was an example. Somebody came on and said, I have bipolar, I have borderline personality disorder, and then you also listed one other one. Yeah, exactly. They definitely can co-occur. They often co-occur because when you struggle with a personality disorder, then you often have other issues that are making life hard for you. So then you end up getting, depressed or anxious or struggling. That's very, very common. So back to the question of how do you heal? So like I said, the first step to how to heal is recognize that something's going wrong and it's not wrong with you. Where it's going wrong with you is that you've been waiting and tolerating it and thinking it's going to get better. You've been accepting the story you've been getting, and the story isn't true. Its story is just to keep you on the hook. Think of, if this is, we're fishing, you've been the fish and you're on the hook. You need to get off the hook. That's the first piece of it. The second piece is you need to get out. And I know that's super hard. It took me a year to get out. I had to line things up. I had to deal with it at a financial business end. I couldn't just walk out and leave. I needed a place to go. I didn't have anywhere to go. I was living in a foreign country. So it takes time to do that. So get your ducks lined up, start to save money up, start to develop an independent identity outside of this person. And probably means you're going to have to be very private about that, because any word they get of that, they're going to sabotage. So don't threaten them with you leaving, just prepare to leave. It's really important you prepare to leave. And then when you get out, there's stages. It happens kind of like it's sort of a lot like grief. To be honest with you, I, with losing my first husband to cancer, I'm very well acquainted to the stages of grief. It's messy. It's very messy. And I found getting used to life without the narcissist very messy as well. I struggled with boredom, with loneliness. I felt some guilt. I had a lot of rage. I struggled with anxiety. I struggled sleeping. I had a lot of issues with it. So it's really helpful to get a community, to join a community with other people who understand what you're going through, who can provide spaces for that. And I'd love you to become part of Toxic Free Relationship Club, which is like a group coaching membership club. It's an ongoing club that you can join. And each week we hang out at least 1 hour a week where we talk about issues as a group live. We talk about them. There's also an interaction with each other for support. You can get advice for each other. You can also just come and you can message me directly, get advice from me. So, it's a really amazing way for you to meet other people. And then I also provide ongoing training to that group that's separate from training from elsewhere. We often do things like meditative practices together. We talk about how to manage triggers. We do all sorts of stuff that really is very, very helpful. So it's so good for you not to be alone. And I want you guys to know, my membership's not cheap. It's $75 a month. But if you have financial difficulties and you really feel that you could participate and belong to something like that, please get a hold of me. I'm happy to make a financial assistance arrangement with you for you individually. So just let me know this is something that you're struggling with. I would love to have you be a member of ours, and I don't want finances to stand in the way. I also think it's really helpful to get a lot of education. That's one of the first things I did. I joined a group, just like I'm offering you guys. I joined a group. I was part of that group for 3 hours a week for over a year. I met with that group for a year. In fact, I just rejoined that group just this fall for some, just kind of like honing in on my own issues and taking myself to the next level, because I always believe this process is an ongoing process. We never get to the end of it. But the other thing that really helps is get education. Thank you so much. Consider getting support like coaching and counseling. And this is a great question, Samantha. You do have to really address the trauma. You guys are coming out of these relationships highly traumatized. So you need to learn skills to reorient that, to self-soothe. And that may include meditation, mindfulness practices, breath work. All those things are really, really helpful. Again, that's something I offer through the club, so that if you need help and good reminders, you need access, that's something that I'm actively providing to that group. So I'd love to have you be a part of it. And also consider, like I said, group coaching and counseling. Right now, I've been doing a Healed and Empowered 12-week group coaching with a set of survivors. It's been amazing. We're working through all the different feeling and healing stages. Like, how do we create safety for ourselves again? How do we build trust into ourselves again? How do we deal with the shame that we're really struggling with, feeling like that? How do we get into this relationship when we feel embarrassed that we did this? Oh, I love that. Ice baths. What a great idea. I often go down, Renee, down to the pool in the winter, in the fall and the winter, and get into I'm in Texas, so it's not ice. There's no ice here, but I go down. Oh, you like my princess hair. Thank you so much. I go down and I get into that cold water. It just feels amazing. Feels really, really good. And Gala girl, I hate hearing that. You said, I don't trust anyone anymore. I know a lot of you feel that way. I know you're echoing what many of us in this area, in this space today feel. but it can be rebuilt. You can learn to trust again. You can approach relationships in a different way, but it takes safety and practice and working with others who are in the same place and can do this with you, where you can talk about your fears out loud. So I'll take this last question before we wrap up because I'm jumping into my group right now. So I'm going to go do a live office hours with my group coaching here membership. Again, if you'd like to learn more about that, see the link in my bio. But Rocky wants to know, what's the likelihood of narcissists having at least one narcissistic parent? Can I make an educated guess? I can't make an educated guess that's super good in research. I don't know something is highly reliable in research, but I know that there is a decent rate of occurrence. So if you got a parent who's narcissistic, there's a chance that the kids are going to struggle with that. I know there's been identical twin studies. I actually saw the research on that. They looked at various personality disorders and looked at the rate of it occurring in both identical twins raised apart. And narcissist was high. It's one of the highest ones. I think the absolute highest was antisocial personality disorder, which makes sense to me. I think psychopaths are born. Sociopaths, I think, are made. But if you get a psychopath, chances are they're born. But I think narcissists were second in line, with it occurring 70% of the time. If one identical twin had it, then the likelihood of the second had it was 70%. So there is a high rate of occurrence based upon genetics. All right, you guys. Hey, somebody mentioned I would love to, but I can't afford a lot of therapy, but I read a lot of books. And are you guys aware of breaking free from narcissistic abuse? I have a podcast. So you're always looking for more information. And we now have a Substack newsletter where I'm sending that out weekly. So if you'd like to get more information on narcissistic abuse, check into my podcast, sign up for Breaking Free with Kerry and Tara.substack.com. And I'd love to have you guys there. And now I love Tara, and I have a blast. I don't know if you guys are aware of her Tara Ball. It's called Tara.relationship coach is where you find her. She's my co-host, and we have an amazing time. We also have a YouTube channel now, and you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Breaking Free from Narc Abuse. Breaking Free from Narc Abuse. All right, you guys, this has been amazing. I always love these lives. You're so much fun to hang out with. You're my favorite people. Thank you for that today. I will be back here next week on Tuesday at 4 p.m. And until then, stay sane, stay healthy, stay careful. And I really, really appreciate that so much. All right. Bye-bye.